So I forgot to tell you all that last week I had started into a series on the family. So if you weren't here last week, we talked about what it means to get old and how you can experience gray hair even as a blessing. We're going to continue today talking about the family. But first, you guys remember Siegfried and Roy? Magicians. I don't even know if they're performing anymore. And one of their big things was they worked with like white tigers and lions and the animal taming aspect of the show. And I remember a couple years ago, there was a 480-pound white tiger, and they were like doing their standard performance, and all of a sudden the tiger leaps up and grabs one of them by the throat and drags him off stage. And I remember like everybody was reacting to this in the aftermath. They were going, how could this happen? What was it that triggered it? How did it happen? And I'm like, what do you mean, how did it happen? It's a tiger. We're food. 40 years. I mean, you have a dog do the trick where it sits with a treat on its nose. We think it's impressive. And if it does it for a minute without eating it, they did it for 40 years. And so it's within the tiger's nature to eat food, and we fall under that category. In fact, if anything, I think we shouldn't be surprised when you're working with tigers and you get attacked. It's, to me, a little bit more surprising when things go smoothly, when things are going well. Today we're going to talk about marriage. And marriage is hard. And anybody who doesn't agree, so you've maybe not been married. But that shouldn't surprise us, because one of the foundational truths of the gospel is the idea that we are all crooked and selfish from birth. And God saves us and He changes us, but we still have that corrupt human nature that we are inherently selfish and a little bit evil. And so it should not be surprising when sometimes marriage can feel like a tiger attack. Or perhaps an endless series of paper cuts. Y'all don't know what Sarah puts up with being married to me. I think one year for our anniversary, I got her a card that I thought was great. It was "You're my favorite uncle" card, and I just crossed out uncle and wrote wife right above there. She deals with my weirdness. And now to you, like on a Sunday morning, I just seem like eccentric, but you don't have to live with me day in, day out. Like she had to sit through me reading to her a series of haikus I wrote about some string cheese I found in the parking lot, and asking her to sit through that. I live in my head, and often I'm just oblivious to the world around me. So many times Sarah is like dehydrated because she'll pour herself a glass of water, and she sets it down. I'll just walk by and be like, "Oh, water," and drink it before she can get to it. Like many pastors, though, sometimes I place my desire to be successful in ministry before the needs of my family, of my wife. Can I be real with y'all today? I am not a perfect husband. Ours is not a perfect marriage. I've been learning. We're going to celebrate 10 years in October. I feel I've learned a lot in 10 years, but I've still got a long way to go. So I hope you hear what I have to say today as someone who is very much still learning. As one of my classmates, he'd been married for 30-some years, and I think we were like 1 year into marriage at that point. I was like, how do you do? What advice do you have for me? And he said, well, if you ask my wife, she will just shake her head and say, lots of Jesus. Lots of Jesus. We're going to go into Ephesians chapter 5 today. If you open your Bibles, you can follow along. We're going to look at a very specific passage, but before we look at that, I just want to say this. Everything in the Christian walk applies to the marriage relationship. Earlier in Ephesians, he says, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. That applies very much to marriage and to other Christian relationships. You want to talk about forgiveness, loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor needs to start within your own house before it makes its way across the street. So many of those general passages in the Bible also apply to marriage, but today we're going to look at some very specific commands given to those who are married. Ephesians 5, starting at verse 24. Wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. I warned you, right? This wasn't going to be easy. The idea of submission in these passages in particular is really challenging for our culture to come to grips with. I'll confess to you that as I do premarital counseling with couples coming in, we read these verses, and I feel as a pastor, I almost immediately read those and then apologize. I read those and I'm let me try and soften the blow for you a little bit. When is submission ever talked about in our culture as a positive thing? In fact, we take the idea of a wife who is submissive, that particular word, we only make jokes about it nowadays. We associate it with oppression and dysfunctional relationships. We laugh about it. We think of, back in the 50s, and advertisements that looked like this. The husband is the king of the household, and the wife exists to serve him. We post those lists on Facebook, expectations for housewives of this era, telling them things like, when your husband gets home, have dinner ready. Prepare yourself. Take 15 minutes to rest so you'll be refreshed when he arrives. Touch up your makeup. Put a ribbon in your hair and be fresh looking, happy. He's just been with a lot of work-weary people. If it's colder, light a fire for him to unwind by. Don't complain if he's late for dinner or if he stays out all night. Be happy. After all, catering for his comfort will provide you with immense personal satisfaction. Sarah, you taking notes? I've considered that I get to say whatever I want up here right now, but how this plays out at home is an entirely different story. So I understand that the idea of submission most often for us is something that we make fun of. And yet, Jesus submitted to the Father. We have that fear, right? That in submitting, in particular within the marriage relationship, that it will lead to abuse, that it is a statement that women are somehow inferior to men, and yet the Bible describes Jesus as being completely equal to God and the Father, and yet in the Garden of Gethsemane, what does he pray? Father, not my will, but yours be done. And when the Bible talks about the end of all things, it says that Jesus will hand over things to the Father and will be subject to God using the same word, hypotasso, as is used to describe the wife submitting to the husband. 1 Corinthians 15:28. Then the Son himself will be made subject to, that's the same Greek word, to him who put everything under him, so that God may be all in all. We see within the Trinity itself an expression of submission and equality. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourselves, even if you would say it out loud, as you consider the person that you are married to, you might say, he doesn't deserve it. To be honest today, I would agree with you. He doesn't. God does. Right before that, in the context of life in the church in Ephesians, he writes, church, and says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, your husband is not your Savior. Earlier, right, your husband doesn't save you. He is not God. You do not worship him. But it is something that we do out of reverence for God. Now, he writes this to the church, and there's not the expectation in the church that we are all doormats. And I just want to say, I know that some of you have lived in abusive relationships. And what he is describing as he commands wives to submit to their husbands is never an endorsement of sin. And it is never an endorsement of abuse. And yet, here's the situation in the early church. So we say, well, does my husband deserve it or not? In the early church, the gospel spreads, and what you have happen is sometimes one half of a couple would receive the gospel and the other wouldn't. And so this is a situation in the church, and it still is today, where you'll have a wife who comes to church and a husband who sits at home. Or a husband who comes to church and a wife who sits at home. One of them is following Jesus and submitting to him, and the other one isn't. Peter writes to the church about this situation. Wives, in the same way, submit, there's that word again. Submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. And so here, he's talking to a situation where the husband's not even a believer, not even trying to follow Jesus. And he says, even in that situation, because of what God has done for you, wives, not because it's easy, not because it's natural, but because of what God has done for you, submit to your husbands. Precisely because this is something that stands out in a world that is based on selfishness. You preach the gospel by your behavior in marriage. I'll say it is only the power of God that makes this possible. So you might say, okay, several times in the Bible, wives specifically are told to submit. How do I do that? The shorter answer is, I don't know what that will look like for you. Here's where pastors get into problems, right? Is they'll read verses like this, and then they project their own concepts of what the husband and wife roles look like. And so, well, wives, this is exactly what you need to do, and husbands, this is exactly what you need to do. God could have given us detailed rules. God could have said, here's how you're to handle your family budget and job decisions, and how far that mat in the bathroom is supposed to be away from the shower. Is it supposed to be right up against, or like an inch away? This has been an ongoing discussion in our marriage. And yet, God leaves it kind of vague. He simply says, submit. He doesn't say exactly how or when or what that will look like in the context of marriage. And so here's what I'll just tell you today. You work that out. This is what the Bible commands you to do, and so it is up to you in the context of your marriage and your relationship. And I think it would be enough for us to just say, submit in some way. For some of you, that might be a pretty large step. A large enough concept for you to wrap your mind around. And let me tell you, husbands, right now, you do not read these verses to your wife and tell her, hey, you need to be doing this. Just a word to the wise, it will not turn out the way you want it to. So wives, you read this part, and you figure out how to apply this in your life. Husbands, let God work with them on that. Now, this is not just a message aimed at wives, but to husbands. If it wasn't, this would be pretty wretched. I'll be honest. If that was all the Bible had to say about marriage was wives, just submit to your husbands, it would lead to abuse and encourage it. So wives, now I'm going to start talking to the person next to you. Husbands, if you expect your wife to treat you as the head of the family, are you acting like it? Some women find submission so difficult because there is no leadership from the husband. Or leadership of the wrong kind. When the husband is called the head, it is not a call for you husbands to charge into the living room and take back control of the TV remote so you can watch something other than shows about British royalty. That's not what the Bible's talking about. It is not a call for you to sit on a throne in the house and have her serve your every need. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Here's what the next verses have to say about husbands, your role in relation to your wife. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Now it's kind of interesting here. Paul, he's writing, here, husbands, wives, here's what you need to do. And yet it takes a turn and he starts talking about Jesus instead and what he did for us. Here's a weird thing about the Bible. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, as many sermons and materials as there are out there that talk about Christian marriage, there are only a handful of passages in the entire Bible that specifically talk about marriage. This is the longest section in the New Testament that does. And yet here, even in the most extensive passage talking about marriage, it still makes a turn and starts talking about Jesus instead. Concluding that marriage itself is a mystery in the way it reflects the unity between Jesus and the church, which is his body. The way that he cares for us as we're one body under him. Let me tell you this morning, the Bible is not a marriage manual designed to bring you closer to your spouse. From start to finish, the Bible is about God. And it is about what God did for us, what he intends to do through us, and how he will be glorified in us. That is what the Bible is about. Now, it may make you a better husband. God goes in, he begins changing stuff in your life. I was a wretched person to live with before Jesus stepped in. I have no problem telling you that. I've gotten a little better. So it may be that the gospel comes in and Jesus changes your life and it improves your marriage. Or it could lead to your spouse rejecting the gospel and rejecting you because of it. It happens. So here he can't even talk about marriage for more than a few sentences without just going back and reminding the church of what Jesus did for us. And yet he says to husbands, how did Jesus love us? That is your standard. So how did Jesus love us? He, on our behalf, he became one of us, and he lived and he gave himself up, he suffered and died to make us clean. It was a sacrificial love. He gave up his own desires, his own privilege that he had every right to claim as God in the flesh. He did not claim it for himself. He lived as a servant. He washed his disciples' feet, the work that even the lowliest of servants wouldn't do. And why is it, husbands, that you refuse to clean toilets? If Jesus washed his disciples' feet. Husbands, you are called to sacrifice. I am so tired of selfish men in their relationships refusing to do what is difficult, refusing to lay themselves down for the person that they're married to. If there is a sacrifice to be made, if there is someone who needs to stay up all night, if there is someone who needs to endure hardship, husbands, you are called to take the lead in stepping up to that. And this does not just apply to work outside of them. He continues in verse 28. So he's talking about Jesus, and he turns back here to husbands is, Jesus cares for our concerns. Verse 28, in this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Let me just tell you, husbands, the better you treat your wife, the better your life will be. Verse 29, after all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body. Here he goes back to talking about Jesus again, just as Christ does the church, for he are members of his body. When you get married, when you say, I do, you become one with your spouse. And so he says, husbands, do you take care of yourself? Take care of your wife in the same way. Now you might be sitting here thinking, wow, maybe I don't take care of my body in the way that I should. Let me just give you an example. I am never hungry and ignore it. Guys, are you ever like hungry and just brush it off I'll deal with that later? I can tell you myself, I am never hungry for very long without doing something about it. In fact, there are few things that I am ever doing that will stop me from eating immediately. In fact, when I used to work and I'd pack a lunch with me, I learned that I lacked the willpower to eat my lunch at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so I had to start packing 2 sandwiches because as soon as I was hungry, I'd be oh, it's time to eat. And I'd take care of that need. And I'd pack 2 lunches and then some extra snacks. In fact, sometimes I eat just to make sure that I'm not hungry. I'm am I hungry? I don't know. I could be, or I could be hungry in the near future, so let me just go ahead and eat these leftovers Sarah was planning to eat for lunch. And see what she deals with. Let me ask you, husbands, let me ask myself, am I as quick to respond to the needs of my wife as I am to respond to my own hunger? Because again, we don't brush that off. It is a serious thing. And we do have something I'm hungry. The world should stop until that need is met. Do we respond to our wives in the same way? I'll eat just to make sure I'm not hungry. Do we care for the needs of our wives in the same way? Are you as willing to purchase a new vacuum cleaner for your wife as you are to purchase a new gun for yourself? Are we as willing to meet the needs of the person that we're married to as we are when we are married? Verse 31, he keeps pointing back to Jesus. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. It is so easy, especially in our culture, in the world that is built on selfishness, for people who have been married for 10 days or 100 years, to turn into that habit of acting and behaving selfishly and looking out for their own interests. Look at the person that we swore to be with until death do us part, and sometimes we say, it's not fair the way that they're acting to me. I can't believe they said that. It's not fair. I have these needs that they're not meeting, and it's not fair. And I got to look out for number one. I got to look out for me, and I've got to take what I think belongs to me, and yet the gospel gives us the opposite message. It says that we are called to lay down ourselves and to love the other. Maybe you're like me, growing up in a generation that witnessed the divorce of our parents. So swearing to ourselves that we will never go down that road is an epidemic that continues in the church today. Relationship that God created to be life-lasting. We ask you this morning, do you need God to work in your life today in the way that you treat your husband, the way that you treat your wife? I'll be honest, I don't think any of us would sit here this morning and say, like, I have perfected. But if you say it out loud and see what the person next to you says, I have perfected this love in marriage. So I think all of us, wherever we are, come before God today saying, you know what, I need your mercy and grace. I need, God, your incredible power that brought Jesus back to life. I need that power working in my heart because I am a selfish person. Let's pray. God, I pray for those among us who are married, and there are so many things that could be said about this closest of all of our relationships. Sometimes we find your words to us challenging because you call us to do what does not feel natural, what is not easy. And yet you set for us the perfect model of both submission and sacrificial love. God, I pray that our relationships would be defined by a love that is different and compelling, and not just as a witness to the person that we're married to, but the culture around us. God, that there would be young couples who are just starting out, that they would look at the people in this church and their marriages and they would say, I want a relationship that looks like that. That they would see the grace of the gospel working through us and they would figure that they are missing out on something. God, I pray for those marriages that are struggling. God, that when every day feels like a battle, when people even begin to feel that there is no hope, that you would remind them that your power is not limited to just creating the universe and the world. That you don't just work in the big scheme of things and controlling human history, that you want to step into our lives, our broken situations.